Hey everyone, it's Kevin from FLOAT STL. It was snowing here in the window, so I thought I'd pop over so you could watch some of that in the background. Anyway, another thing I wanted to share with you all, a lot of times people will ask, how do I prepare for my first float? What are the ways to set myself up for a good first float experience? What are some things that I might need to know before I come in? And what we usually share about that, one thing we talk about is caffeine. Um, we recommend to reduce caffeine intake the day of your float. Of course, if that's something that feels like it needs to happen for comfort or otherwise, then it tends to happen. But just the idea around that is we believe that allowing yourself to come in the most relaxed state possible can help ensure the most positive float experience. So, caffeine being a stimulant, it's going to elevate your system. Um, and then as you're entering into the float experience, there's a lot of kind of, decelerating in your system. And if you are stimulated in that experience, oftentimes, especially for your first float, it can be less pleasant. I think as we float here and we have many, many opportunities to float, we tend to explore and experiment and kind of engage in a diverse range of activities around floating to understand all of the different ways and parameters. But for someone coming in for their first float, we would recommend them to reduce or remove any sort of caffeine intake the day of their float. Another important aspect to consider is food. Um, so, the fact that you are going to be lying horizontal on your back in body temperature water, floating in near zero gravity, it's not really helpful to have a full belly of food. Um, a full belly of food can oftentimes lead to feeling of discomfort, feeling of heaviness. Also, a lot of energy goes into digesting that food, so that can also have an impact of kind of increasing body temperature or increasing perception of temperature. So we recommend to at most have a light snack before you're coming in for your float. We've found that it's most often most comfortable to float on a light stomach or an empty stomach. And one of the other things that's really enjoyable is after you finish your float, feeling very present, very embodied, very connected to your sensory experience, and being able to exit your float at that time and go find something delicious to eat and fill your belly then rather than before. A couple other things that are helpful, I think after your first float, it oftentimes can be uncertain how you might feel. And it's helpful if you can, if you have the luxury to retain some free space after your float experience. So some of the most not upsetting, but maybe like conflicted experiences we see are when someone is exiting their float. They've either reached this place of bliss or peace, relaxation, whatever you might call it. And for whatever reason, they need to rush off to the next thing that's on their calendar. And maybe not ever having a float experience before, they couldn't anticipate what that might be like. But they usually seem pretty sad when all they want to do is just sit and drink a nice warm cup of tea and kind of rest and integrate in this beautiful experience they just had. But what they really need to do is, go pick somebody up from the airport or something. Leave some space for yourself after your float if you can. It's nice to do an evening float and transition that right into sleep. It's nice to do a 5 o'clock float and transition that into a meal followed by some sleep. Or if you're floating in the morning or the early afternoon, it's nice to just have some space left open for the rest of your day and allowing yourself the opportunity to determine in that moment how you'd like to spend that time. You might feel like going for a walk, you might feel like taking a nap, you might feel like spending time with friends. It could be a variety of things, but allowing yourself the opportunity to come to that realization after your float and not necessarily trying to anticipate what it might be before your float. A couple other things, we always recommend people to just pay attention to any places on their skin where there might be irritation. So if that's going to be caused by shaving or anything else that's going to cause, the skin to be sensitive or raw, that's something that will be irritated often by the Epsom salt solution. So just giving, good caution and care to how you're showing up to your float for that first experience, and being aware of any sort of cuts or scratches or abrasions that might receive the salt solution in a way that is irritating or painful. That can always be distracting, and it certainly isn't how you would like to have your first float experience. So those are the main things we recommend. I think the other one is, definitely being intentional and thoughtful about your relationship with electronic devices. So, I think oftentimes people will leave their phones in their car, they'll leave their phones in their bag. It's oftentimes difficult to find space from those devices, and often they're making their way into the float space, to take pictures and videos about the experience. But it is helpful, as you're kind of engaging on this little journey to give yourself some space. It really is a practice of relationship with self, practice of self-care, practice of self-exploration and self-awareness. And so it can be helpful to, just take an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and create that space for the experience to happen, knowing that your electronic device is going to be there waiting for you, just as it was before the float. So those were just a few things I wanted to share with everybody. I'll keep downloading some more thoughts and nuggets into these little videos and posting them on our YouTube channel. If you want, subscribe to the channel, and we'll keep the content coming out. Talk to you soon.